From Bowling Green State University and the Institute for the Study of Culture and Society, this is BG Ideas.
I'm going to show you this with a wonderful experiment.
You're listening to the Big Ideas Podcast, a collaboration between the Institute for the Study of Culture and Society and the School of Media and Communication at Bowling Green State University. I'm Jolie Sheffer, Professor of English and American Culture Studies and the Director of ICS. As always, the opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of BGSU or its employees. Bowling Green State University and its campuses are situated in the Great Black Swamp in the lower Great Lakes region. This land is the homeland of the Wyandot, Kickapoo, Miami, Potawatomi, Ottawa, and multiple other indigenous tribal nations, present and past, who were forcibly removed to and from the area. We recognize these historical and contemporary ties in our efforts toward decolonizing history, and we thank the indigenous individuals and communities who've been living and working on this land from time immemorial. Today's guest is Dr. Sheri Wells-Jensen. She's an associate professor of linguistics at BGSU and a former ICS faculty fellow. Her research areas include disability studies and English as a second language. In February of 2023, Sheri spoke at the United Nations as part of the 8th International Day of Women and Girls in Science Assembly. She's also the most recent Baruch S. Blumberg NASA / Library of Congress Chair in Astrobiology, Exploration, and Scientific Innovation. Thanks for joining me today, Sheri.
Thank you so much. It's a delight to be here.
Sheri, you have had a very varied and multidisciplinary academic career. Could you give us a short version of some of the major sort of turns in your professional journey leading to your current areas of research and into disability advocacy?
Back a long, long time ago, my very first semester at BGSU, when Tom Weimer was chair, lovely, forward-thinking, amazing man, Tom Weimer. He asked me as just sort of a part of a get-to-know-you chat, what would you like to teach this summer, oh, newly hired faculty member in English? And I said, because I don't know why, I said, I want to teach a class in xenolinguistics. I want to teach a class about alien language and linguistics. And instead of telling me to go roll my hoop, Tom said, okay, which meant I had to do a lot of research really, really, really fast so I could be at least smart enough to say more than Klingon, to my students. And so I developed this class. And it was a lot of fun. The students had a great time. I learned a million things. They learned a million things. We had so much fun. It was a great summer class. And then nothing happened for about 13 years. Mm. One of the people who was very kind to me while I was teaching that class is a fellow named Douglas Vekich, who is now the president of Messaging Extraterrestrial Intelligence International. And I had written to him and said, did you send me this paper? I can't find it. I hear you wrote this paper. And, like you kind of do the reach out, right? And 13 years after I did that, he was arranging a colloquium about linguistics at the SETI International, the place where Carl Sagan worked. And he said, you want to come? And I said, without thinking about it, just kind of like I did when I decided to teach that class, without thinking about the consequences, I said, of course, yes. And then just like I did in 2001, I went into this desperate reading frenzy, trying to catch up on the SETI literature so I would not look stupid in front of people who knew Carl Sagan. Because Carl Sagan, there's a generation of us who grew up on Cosmos, right?
Yes, the pale blue dot. Yes. And a vision for science as connected to the humanities, not as these totally separate realms.
Exactly. And really with the message that science belongs to you. Science is not a holy grail that you seek and that you long for and you wish to be let into. Science belongs to you because you are a thinking, sentient being. Science is part of your birthright as a living creature. And so I went on a reading spree. And one of the things that I kept encountering was the claim that any intelligence capable of building a radio telescope, so an intelligence that we might conceivably contact, because if they don't have a radio telescope, they can be as smart as they want on their planet over there around their star, and we will never hear from them. And any intelligence that was that smart was going to have some analog of human visual perception. And as a blind person, I had multiple reactions of WTF and oh my heavens me and what, like really seriously, you can imagine a whole nother civilization, but you can't imagine a blind person doing anything. And so rage, right? Mm-hmm. It's all rage and joy for me all the time. Those are my fuels.
It's sort of yin and yang.
Yeah. That's how that powers my existence. And so I thought, well, I need to write about this. I need to explain to people, apparently, that as a blind person myself, I feel very, very strongly that blind people can and should be doing science whenever they want to, just like anybody else. And so I wrote this paper. It was a great paper, so much fun. Wrote a paper about the blind aliens and how they invented, just how you would trace, super interesting, right? How would you trace the path of technological development from here we are, we're walking around on the earth, learning basic things to discovering basic scientific principles. And humanity did this partly by looking up into the sky and going, oh, what are those funny little lights up there? What does that mean? But the blind people weren't going to do that, right? So I traced this whole differently ordered path through science and got us all the way up to radar and the self-driving car, right? Because sign me up for one of those, please. And I gave the paper, and we had so much fun. And it was perfectly fine paper, and we argued, and we laughed, and it was a 45-minute thing, and we went on. And then when I got done with the paper, I approached the edge of the stage to take the 3 very shallow carpeted steps back down to where I'd been sitting. And somebody leapt up from the front row and came hustling up to the stage to, quote, help me down those steps. And I thought, I just felt this ice water rush of despair. I have just explained to you that I, as a blind being, can smelt metals. I can launch a rocket, and you don't think I can walk down 3 carpeted stairs that you'd seen me walk up just 45 minutes ago. And so it became really clear to me that we were not just talking about facts here. We were also talking about culture. And we were also talking about deep ingrained ableist ideas of what disabled people can and should be doing. What was our place in the world? Was it, in fact, smelting metal and building rocket ships or not? And apparently, if you go with the cultural presuppositions that are baked in about disability, not is kind of the answer. It's kind of where people are, right? And so it's this lovely, complicated position where we're talking about disability, which carries all that cultural baggage, and the idea of going into space. So if the aliens can be out there and be blind, what are we doing with the space program now as we're designing our space stations and designing our rockets? We're at an inflection point where all that work is being done right now. Right now, people are out there building these space stations, making the designs. And are they accessible? Can a disabled person go there? Will we allow it? What don't we know? Is it dangerous? Is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea? How are we going to work with the reality that a quarter of the population of the planet has some kind of disability, and we think of ourselves as a space-going civilization? Like, what are we going to do about that? And so that's where my work falls now, is right in this little nexus between the study of disability, ideas about disability, facts about spaceflight, facts about how we're designing things. And now is exactly the right time to do it, because now is the moment when there are drawing boards and iPads and all that kind of thing all over the nation right now with different people drawing up the plans for space habitats. And what are those plans going to be like? And how do we make sure that when we go to space, we all go to space, not just the 7 of us who are chosen?
So right now, you have been the Baruch Blumberg NASA Library of Congress Chair in Astrobiology, Exploration, and Scientific Innovation. So you've been in D.C. Tell us what you've been doing in that role, and how does this fit into kind of this new ground you're trying to open up for people to reimagine what spaceflight can be and who can participate in that?
Yeah. What have I been doing? Let me think. There's just a lot of thinking about really complicated ironies, I think, to start with, which is not really doing anything. But I mean, you got to think first, right? So, for example, I'm in the Library of Congress, which is basically America's temple to knowledge, right? It is, you go in there, there's marble columns, everything is beautiful, these huge vaulted ceilings with statues of famous thinkers all around the walls and mosaics and a copy of every book ever copyrighted, all available to you. And there's no Braille at the Library of Congress. So you can say, if you want to, and to some extent it is true, that this is the temple to knowledge. But who is welcome at the temple? Who worships at this temple? Who are the people? Who are the acolytes? Who belongs there? There aren't statues of women, for example. There are some statues of people of color, and I would not say that I'm any kind of expert on this, but the representation is, some of it's questionable. Mm-hmm. The disability representation is pretty much non-existent. So to be in this position where there's all this talk about access and welcome, but very clear segments of the world left out, is kind of a power source for me, right? There's work here to be done. So I've been advocating for STEM for girls and women, like we did, that the Science and Braille campaign did at the UN, and sort of revving up for a couple events. We are, with Astro Access, we're going to do an analog mission, which is basically where you do everything that you would have done to go to space and live in a space station for a period of time, except you don't leave Earth. They kind of seal you in. We'll be doing one of those. And the point of that is inclusion, right? So you put some disabled people into that mix. How does that go? What do we need to make the habitat accessible? We will be doing later a symposium on disability in space, where we get the people who are making these plans, as many of them together as possible, so we can sort of compare notes. And hoping to do some activities with some local blind high schoolers, talking about access to STEM and tactile graphics. And do the blind people have the kind of image literacy that they need? So do you have raised lines, images of things in STEM that you might need? What else have I been doing? Well, it seems like there's conferences to go to, papers to write, and I'm writing a book about our Astro Access first zero-gravity flight. That's, I think, my big thing.
So please tell us more about, so you're Flight 1 ambassador with Astro Access, an organization dedicated to opening space flight to people with disabilities. So tell us more about the organization, its relationship to NASA, or is it independent of that, and kind of some more about that work.
Yes, that's a labor of love for sure. So we've had 2 complete chartered flights. I got to be on both of them, which was amazing, and we can talk about that in a minute. Yeah. We are independent. We're not, some NASA folks were on our first flight, also some folks from SpaceX, that's really hard to say. It's really, really hard to say. And Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic, and I think we had a Boeing guy there as well. We're all on our first flight, sort of people who had experience with zero gravity, kind of serving as support staff. And we gathered up 12 the first time and 14 the second time, groups of disabled people, all kinds of disabilities. We had deaf folk, we had blind folk, we had folk in wheelchairs, and we all went on a zero-G flight. And the purposes of those flights are to figure out kind of what sort of accommodations might be useful in zero gravity for different groups of people and test those out in actual zero gravity.
Can you tell us some of the preliminary findings of, now that you've had 2 of these flights? What kinds of things are you thinking about and learning?
So now that we've had 2 of them, we are just moments away from submitting our paper from Flight 1. And on these flights, we did a couple things. We tested some technology for non-auditory cueing for when gravity is going to come back. So, for example, when you're in the zero-G atmosphere, you've got about 20 seconds, and then gravity is going to come back. And so the helpful coach with his microphone shouts at everybody, "Hey, feet down, coming out!" And you're supposed to get your feet down at that point, so that when gravity comes back, you land lightly on your feet instead of with a thump on your head. It's padded, but still no fun to land on your head, right? So if you're deaf and you don't hear that warning, you will feel it, but maybe you want the warning before you start to feel the gravity come back, right? So we tested a set of lights that come on before, as the guy is also shouting. So that was on the first flight. It was on the second flight. It's now being tested on another flight where we have just 2 seats that we have been given. So that non-visual cueing system, then if you're a blind person and you happen to be hanging upside down when they yell feet down coming out, the question is which way is down? Because, I don't know, we can talk about this at some point, but there is nothing about down when you're floating in zero gravity.
That's obvious.
Absolutely nothing. And it doesn't feel like it's not recoverable from your body, which is weird. You think like when you're floating or flying or you think about any of those things, you've always got some kind of, okay, yeah, I know I'm up in the air and it's fun, but I still know where down is. Not in zero gravity. There is no down. There's no down. Your legs and your arms, they don't feel like legs and arms. There's left and right, but there is no more down. So we worked with, especially on our second flight, with some wall graphics, some little things. If you go over, you touch the wall. There's a little tactile indicator that tells you which way down is going to be when down comes back, and also which way the exit is and which way the emergency gear are going to be. So we tested those, found it useful. We also worked with the question of whether a disabled person, we're thinking about wheelchair users and blind people predominantly on this one, can the person in microgravity get their body into a seat and buckle that 5-point harness? Like, how hard is that to do in microgravity? First off, in microgravity, it's not like buckling your seatbelt in a car because you reach for the seatbelt and it's not where it's supposed to be because it's floating somewhere. And then you reach for it, and then all of a sudden you're not where you're supposed to be because you've also floated somewhere. So it's much more complicated. It's really a lot of fun. But it's not quite, it wouldn't be quite as much fun in an emergency if you suddenly have to do that. So we found that mostly the disabled people can do this roughly at the same speed as able-bodied people, but we think that there are some things that we can do to make it easier for everybody. So if you've got a task like that that's already really hard, and it's already really hard, if you look at what disabled people might need as an accommodation to make that easier, that will also make it easier for the non-disabled people who also have to get into that 5-point harness. That was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. It's nice when you can do serious research, but it's also like mind-bendingly great fun. I mean, who gets that? I'm just the luckiest person ever.
Well, and I'm thinking back to your mention of like Carl Sagan and when you were a kid. When you were young, were you interested in science? Was that, or is that something that sort of come through your study of linguistics?
I was passionate about science as a kid, but we know that the portals to science, the ways into formal study of science are controlled by human beings. And human beings are deeply saturated in our cultural soup, if you will. And so as a young girl in a very rural place and someone who was fully blind, the idea that I would go into science, no one said, no, get the heck home. You're not welcome here. No one said that in words. But words aren't the only way that we communicate our culture. And sometimes words are the last thing that fills in. You get messages saying who belongs. We absorb messages wherever we are, saying who belongs in this group and who is not welcome here, and who is inconvenient here. And so I was a reasonably intuitive kid. I could read the room. I knew that although everyone thought it was charming that I was a smart kid and wanted to do science, that was seen as charming, not as a career path. And there's a difference. Is it cute that you like science, or are you a scientist? And those are really two different messages that we give to kids based on our ideas of who they are, what their cultural roles are. Are they rich enough? Are they white enough? Are they male enough? Are they straight enough? Are they able-bodied enough to fit our culturally constructed idea of who a scientist is? And if you aren't that person, you can get into science. But if you look at the numbers, it's more likely that you won't. And that's a thing. That's a cultural construct that we have to set on fire and eliminate, because that's doing a lot of harm to us as a civilization, that we strategically, knowingly allow all these people to be directed away from the STEM fields when we should be welcoming them in.
You're alluding here to kind of your advocacy for women and girls in science. You did speak at the United Nations at the International Day. Can you talk about that event and what some of your messages were in speaking there?
It was amazing. It was amazing. Lots of passionate people trying like crazy to pull the planet away from the edge, right? we're not doing so great. We've got this global warming problem. We have wars. We have poverty. We have so many problems to solve. We literally cannot afford to sideline a quarter of the population and say, you sit here, darling, I'll fix you a plate while we get on with the business of saving the world. We can't afford that. We need everybody. So we were there to remind people of things that they already know. For example, literacy is a human right, straight up. Which means if you are a Braille reader, if you're a person who should be reading Braille, that is your human right. That's not extra. That's not something sweet that we do. That's not a little favor that we're giving you. That room number that should be on your door, on your office door, should be there. That textbook that everyone else is reading should be in your hands if you read Braille. Same time, same textbook, same standard. We're not messing around. We're not playing. That's not for fun. That's not a courtesy. That is your basic human right. And we also just wanted to remind, especially kids, because kids are learning what the world is like, right? And they literally are the future of the world. Just reminding them that, again, it's not cute that you do science. Science is your birthright. If you feel that passion, you know, that thing that you have where like you think, this is so interesting. My whole mind is just absorbed in this super interesting thing, whatever it is, whether it's music or art or chemistry or how an airplane flies, like whatever it is, especially if it's in the STEM field, which is where we really, really are having trouble with our representation. We were there, the Science in Braille campaign was there to remind people that this is our commitment, that we need everybody doing science and science belongs to you.
We're going to take a brief break. Thanks for listening to the Big Ideas podcast.
Question. Answer. Discussion.
If you are passionate about big ideas, consider sponsoring this program. To have your name or organization mentioned here, please contact us at ics@bgsu.edu.
Welcome back to the Big Ideas podcast. Today, I'm talking with Dr. Sheri Wells-Jensen about accessibility and disability justice and space exploration. Sheri, could you talk to us and maybe explain what the term disability justice means and why it's so important in part of these conversations?
I think we have to start from disabled rights are human rights, right? So we're not talking about a different set of goals based on how your body or how your mind works. And we're not just talking, obviously, about physical disabilities. We're also talking about cognitive stuff. If people with intellectual disabilities, whatever you got going on that limits your participation in the world as it is currently built, that gives you what we would call a disability, you have the right to full, equal, joyful participation in the world. And so we talk about disability rights just like we talk about eliminating racism. We want to eliminate racism. We'd like to eliminate homophobia and transphobia and sexism. We want all that stuff that's in our way. It is our obligation to struggle against that stuff. And ableism is the same way. And in many ways, ableism, which is the discrimination against people with disabilities, is at the root of a lot of these other kinds of problems like racism and transphobia. And it's all about judging people and finding that their bodies are not suitable. Right? Your body is not suitable because it's not white enough. Your body is not suitable because you're trans. Your body is not suitable because you're a woman. Your body is not suitable because you use a wheelchair. It's all part of the same set of injustices that we are faced with as a society. And honestly, it is that set of injustices, in my opinion, that could destroy us. Right? Because we need all of us to be working on the problems that we currently face, and we need to all be working together on the problems that we currently face. We cannot afford to fight with each other about what our bodies are like, what we need to do to stop global warming, to combat poverty, to eliminate the other problems that we have as a worldwide culture. Is we need to work together on these things. And we can't afford to be fighting with each other about, oh, you don't see well enough to do science, so we don't need you. We do, in fact, need everybody.
We've talked together about your background in linguistics and the kind of humanities and social sciences. We've also talked about the role of, in alluding to Carl Sagan, like in addition to being a scientist, right, he was a novelist, a storyteller. How do you think that your position as an interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary scholar, how does that kind of help in the work that you're doing? Or do you think it adds something to the conversation to be sort of bringing together multiple approaches to the topic?
I can tell you for certainly that words matter. What you call things matters. So, for example, I talk about disabled people. I don't talk about people with special needs. I don't talk about people who are handy-capable. Whenever I say handy-capable, I have to use that voice because it just makes me want to throw things. Or differently abled. That's not what we talk about. We talk straight up about grown-up people, well, and kids too, who have disabilities, because disability is not a bad word. Mm-hmm. And while we're still thinking disability is a bad word, we're also saying those people are bad people. They're lacking. We don't need them here. We do need them here. We need them all here. So how we refer to each other matters. If you want to refer to someone as having special needs, what you're saying is those people need to be segregated over there because their needs are special. It should not be a newsflash to anyone that the need for inclusion, for literacy, for education, for acceptance, for validation, the need for joy and commitment and companionship, none of those are special needs. Mm-hmm. Those are human needs. We don't have a segment of our population with special needs. We have a segment of our population that is systematically excluded, for example, when we put up stairs, and we don't have the decency to build a ramp when we damn well know that the ramp is what we need to do. So I think that the problems that we face as a planet are deeply interdisciplinary, and we're not going to science our way out of this problem, the problems we have. We're also not going to think our way or believe our way out of these problems. What we need to do is to do the science while we're thinking and believing at the same time, because our solutions are complicated, right? If we want to feed everyone on the planet, we can devise a system for doing that. But if we don't value the lives of people living in countries with food distribution problems as deeply as we value our own lives, then the food distribution is not going to happen, right? So it's not just about figuring out how to do things. We also have to convince ourselves that we must do them. And that is the humanities side of things, right? And also, we're not going to bother building a food distribution system if we don't let people into science who care, right? And we have to care about one another. We have to be the fiercely loving creations that we know we are, or we'll all go down together, right? And I think we're sort of teetering at the edge right now. Are we going to love one another and make the answers happen, or are we going to remain in our frightened little silos and not make it happen? So we need the science and we need the humanities.
You are doing such incredible, exciting, inspirational work. I'm so envious of that you've been on 2 space flights now and all of the great things you're doing. Do you have advice for young people who might be listening who, hearing this, are like, well, I really care about science, or that sounds really exciting, but I didn't think that was for me. What kind of things would you want to say to them?
You have been told lies about yourself and about the world. You've been told lies that science is special and that you are not special, and that there's a mismatch and you don't belong there. You've also been told the lie that all you have to do is try really hard and you can achieve anything. We don't achieve, that's not how it works. You don't just sit in your room and try really hard. You need to be in community. None of us have gotten anywhere on our own. I am not, as a fully blind adult woman, I don't have my job because I believed really hard and tried really hard. Sure, I worked hard, absolutely. But the reason I'm here is because of the disability justice warriors who came before me and who fought like hell for my right to be sitting here right now. I needed those people, and I still need them. So it's actually quite a relief when I first figured it out, that idea that all you had to do is fight for your dreams and you could have them was just not true. It's really quite a relief because it's clearly not true, because we don't all succeed. We don't all get our dreams, right? I mean, it's not all just about trying really hard. It's about coming together. It's about forming relationships. It's about giving yourself the grace to feel overwhelmed when you feel overwhelmed. And it's about admitting that sometimes we're really scared And sometimes we feel profoundly alone, especially as disabled people, I think. And if you are a disabled person of color or a queer disabled person, your lived situation is different than other people's. And you can feel profoundly isolated and demoralized and angry. And all of those are feelings that are real. There's reasons for all that. It doesn't make you weird. It doesn't make you a problem. And as a matter of fact, rage is a very useful fuel source. And it doesn't make you too much. It makes you a human being, right? So I think the things to remember are, again, that science is not a gift. Science is your birthright. No one is being nice to you when they let you do science. You need people who are kind and welcoming, but you also need to understand that science belongs to you. It is because you are an alive, thinking creature. It is your natural habitat. And it's also hard. I think all the other thing that I have to say again, because it's true, right, is it's not easy to get in, and it's not easy. I was at a conference the other day where I was the only woman on the stage, and I think there were 3 other people with disabilities in the room of, I don't know, a couple hundred people, and we all had come together. So I didn't go to that place and discover, oh, look at all the people who are just like me here. Isn't that great? That is not how it happens. And that's hard. So there's a lot of hard things, but there's also profound joy to be had in the play that is science and the investigation. And there's nothing more fun. There's nothing. I mean, it was really fun to fly on the zero-G flight. It was amazing. But the most profound joy for me was sitting up at night with a couple other of the techs who were working on experiments, solving the last-minute problems that came up, just that those relationships as we worked together to solve the problems late into the night and laughed together and argued and told dumb stories and talked politics, talked disability politics, and just became family. That was the part that was even more fun than hanging upside down in zero gravity.
Are there any organizations or resources that you would like to plug for folks who are looking for ways in to science and disability?
There are a lot. And there are a couple that I'm involved with that I think are my favorites, but also probably the first thing to do is look in your community for the people who are welcoming, who are right there, because there will be people who are welcoming, who are right on your doorstep. So before I would say you seek out the national resources, you find out who are the people who are already in your corner, who are, if you're a high school student or, it might not be, maybe your science teacher is not welcoming. But if they are, then that's a really great place to start. So there are all kinds of national and international conferences. I'm involved with Sci Access, which is an organization promoting STEM for disabled folks. Astro Access is our nonprofit that puts on these zero-G flights and does research into what accommodations a disabled person might need in space. But then again, if you're a deaf person, you want to look to the deaf community. If you're a blind person, look to the blind community. If you're a wheelchair user, again, find those folks first. Find that organization first.
Listeners can learn more about Astro Access by visiting their website at astroaccess.org. To keep up with ICS happenings, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at ICS-BGSU and on our Facebook and YouTube pages. We are also now on LinkedIn. Big Ideas is available wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Please subscribe and rate us on your preferred platform. For more information, you can visit bgsu.edu/BG Ideas. Sound engineering for this episode was provided by Caitlin Herman, Brendan Akatura, and Marco Mendoza. Research for this episode was done by Carrie Hanlon and Joe Elia.